Hello. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, Preparing Students with Disabilities for Careers in the Arts, Approaches for Arts Educators. My name is Beth Bienvenu, and I am the Director of Accessibility at the National Endowment for the Arts. A quick note before we proceed, we'll be describing any images on our slides. So this slide has a photo of me, a white woman with medium-length brown hair, glasses, and a purple jacket. This webinar is the third in our series of webinars on careers in the arts for people with disabilities. Our first webinar, which was held in May, provided a high-level overview of the field and experiences of artists and arts employers. The second webinar in June provided information on the financial resources available to people with disabilities seeking careers in the arts. Both are archived on our website. The link is arts.gov/videos/webinars. We will also send this link out to anyone who participates in this webinar. This webinar will continue the series, focusing on programs and approaches to arts education that help prepare students for potential careers in the arts. The webinars are part of a toolkit, which is due to be launched later this year, that will empower artists and other job seekers with disabilities to achieve career success in the arts, while educating arts employers, educators, and grant makers on the roles they play in cultivating full inclusion. The audiences for this toolkit include people with disabilities working in or seeking careers in the arts, as well as arts educators, arts and cultural organizations, and funders. We are doing this work in partnership with Art Beyond Sight as a part of a cooperative agreement, and we are looking forward to sharing this work with you. This slide has logos for the Arts Endowment and for Art Beyond Sight. So today, our webinar is going to cover a very important topic, navigating and the tools and the resources that help people with disabilities pursue careers in the arts through arts education. We are lucky today to have a great set of speakers who are experts in the field. We will start with our host, Tallery McCrae. She's an Access and Inclusion and Education Consultant and co-founder from the National Arts and Sorry, I'm going to skip ahead real quick and talk about housekeeping. So you can access, I'm going to go back. We're just trying to get our slides. So our host, Tallery McCrae, is an Access and Inclusion and Education Consultant and the co-founder of the National Disability Theater. Tallery will lead us through the conversation. We will then hear from Chandra Benito, the Executive Director of Art Access in Utah, a community-based arts program for people with disabilities. Amanda McPhee, an Arts Education Coordinator for the Office of the Arts in the New York City Department of Education, will talk about K-12 education. Then we'll have Giselle Chava-O'Gara, the Artistic Director of VCO Dance Project, who will talk about arts education and professional development for dancers. And finally, we'll wrap up with a national perspective from Jonathan Herman, the CEO of the National Guild for Community Arts Education. And to close, we'll have a bit of dialogue and answer your questions. So now we'll talk about housekeeping. You can access the audio for this webinar via the web platform or by calling 877-685-5350 with the passcode 870335. Keep in mind there may be a delay with the slides if you are using the phone option. Captions are available using the link provided on the screen. The audience is muted and will stay muted throughout the webinar. However, you can submit questions for our speakers using the question and answer window. We will have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. And please help us continue the conversation. Throughout the webinar and afterward, please use social media. You can live tweet using the hashtag #DisabilityArtsCareers. The webinar will run for approximately an hour and 15 minutes and will be archived with a transcript. Tallery's going to say a few words about language in a moment, but I just want to say a note that we recognize that there are multiple preferences for the terminology to use when referring to people with disabilities. Throughout all of these webinars, you will hear intentional uses of both person-first language and identity-first language. So, to dig into today's topic, I'd like to introduce our host. Tallery McCrae is a disabled theater artist based in Louisville, Kentucky. She works as a visiting teaching artist for grades K through 12 and collaborates as an access consultant with performing arts organizations. And she is the co-founder of the National Disability Theater, which currently is serving as the artists in residence at the La Jolla Playhouse in San Diego for their 2019 and 2020 season. So I'd like to welcome Tallery to the webinar.
Beth, thank you so much. As Beth said, my name is Tallery, which is pronounced just like Valerie, but with a T. And on my slide at the moment is a picture of myself. I am a white woman with short to medium straight brown hair. And in the picture, I am sitting in a red chair, wearing a black shirt and holding a black microphone to my mouth. As the host, I always think that it is useful to think about the ways in which we have the conversation. So I would like to offer 3 thoughts to help frame and to provide guidelines for how we are going to talk about accessibility as we think about the tools and resources that we might need in order to make sure that people with disabilities are included in professional careers in the arts. The first thought that I would like to offer the group is that we are not going to focus on disability and difference individually and think about people's individual diagnoses or things that individuals cannot do. Rather, we are going to think about disability and difference with a social lens and focus on how to make environments accessible for as many people as possible. Beyond thinking about accessibility using a social lens and a social justice lens, we are also going to acknowledge that disability is a cultural experience, and that particularly adults with disabilities engage with their disability identity not just for the purposes of being included in mainstream society, but also to engage in deep parts of their own identity, and that disability culture has its own languages, customs, cultures, and humors, and that disability culture can change and its subcultures can change based on the disabilities that people experience. The second reminder or guideline that I would like to offer the group is what Beth mentioned earlier, the idea that language is really important and that the words we use are also really important and can and should be constantly thought about, interrogated, and changed. That being said, the words that we use should not ever stop our work from moving forward. So for today, I would like to give us permission as a group to use words that may not be comfortable or familiar to us. I would like to give us permission to use words, whether they be person first or identity first, to move the work forward. And I would like to offer the idea that all of us will forgive each other and give each other grace if we use language that is not appropriate. The third thought that I would like to offer in terms of a guideline is that when we think about a specific word, the word inclusion is becoming more and more complicated for adult artists and professionals with disabilities, because it is important to acknowledge that social inclusion is not the end-all be-all of our social justice goals, that there is also a very important part to be played by affinity spaces where people with disabilities can exist and make work within their own culture. That being said, I would like to propose that today we all assume that there are many benefits to the idea of social inclusion, and that for today, presenters will be using inclusion with that positive reference in mind. Finally, the last thing I would like to offer is the idea that this webinar creates a safe space for all of us, and that things that are said here are understood with the underlying intention of being respectful. As we think about safe space more deeply, I would like to offer 3 thoughts in terms of what safe space means on a practical level. The first thought I would like to offer is that safe space means we are allowing each other the grace to make mistakes. Equally important to making mistakes, I would also like to offer that part of this webinar is giving each other the grace and the space to own our mistakes. If we say something that is not correct or that we think is unintentional, we have the space today to self-correct and to gently correct each other if that is appropriate during the course of the webinar. Finally, as we think about safe space, I also want to acknowledge that because our time together is limited today, we might have to make space after the webinar to address some important issues that come up. So that if you feel like you have something important you need to share or something that needs to be said, please, please, please share that with our, in the question box, share that with the NEA, and that our team in Washington, D.C. will do their very best to address things, if not possible during the webinar, to do things after that. In my own personal experience as a theater arts educator and as a professional theater artist, the idea of being able to say, oops, out loud, I have made a mistake, is really important. And equally, it is important to be able to say, ouch, something that you said, even though it did not have this intent, had the impact of hurting me. So I would like to offer oops and ouch as a way to communicate how we are feeling and responding to the things that are shared today. Beth, that's all I have to say about how we might frame and think about our work today. And I would like to pass it off to our first presenter, Chandra, to think a little bit about how we might think about the tools and resources we need for professional artists in community-based settings.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This is Chandra Benito. You can see me on the screen, and I have about short curly hair, white woman, brown short curly hair. In the photo, I'm wearing bright pink lipstick, which is pretty standard for me, and a floral dress and a denim jacket. So I'm the executive director of Art Access, and I am so thrilled to be here with you talking about some of my favorite topics. So kind of launching in. So the title is kind of how I'm framing my conversation with you today. It's Careers in the Arts and Disability. Prepare the arts and cultural sector and they will come. And then I also have my name, Chandra Benito, with MSW. I'm a Master's of Social Work. I'm the Executive Director of Art Access, and I live in Salt Lake City, Utah. So I wanted to get a roadmap what I'll be discussing with you today, just so that we all kind of have a kind of an expectation of what we're going to be talking about. So the first is I'll be giving an overview of Art Access, which is the organization that I work at, in our programs and what we do. And then also next will be my journey as an artist/arts professional with a disability. And then I'll be going into a piece kind of called Wait, Why? Or also kind of who needs preparing. Then we will talk about preparing the arts and cultural sector, and then also supporting potential and emerging arts professionals with disabilities. So let's jump in. So Art Access. On this slide, to the left of the slide is our logo. And then on the right of the slide, I'm going to read the mission of Art Access. So the mission of Art Access is to build an inclusive and diverse arts community in Utah by providing creative opportunities to people with disabilities and other marginalized communities, and through public engagement in the arts. So some basic kind of foundational background about Art Access. On this slide, we have a picture of our gallery. So we have a 2-room gallery where we every month have 2 separate exhibits. And our exhibits are exhibits by artists with disabilities, and then also artists from other marginalized communities that we serve. And then also art that deals with social issues and about issues that are important to the community. I think it's also kind of important to name that the wording that we use for so we serve people with disabilities, but also marginalized communities. I like to kind of unpack the word marginalized a little bit because, you know, that was something that when we were redoing our mission about 3 years ago, we kind of grappled with around what word to use, because we really wanted to use the word that described that we're not talking about like underprivileged or quote unquote like that kind of language that's really that can be difficult to describe, but really recognizing that there are communities that have been excluded from the arts or excluded, especially in mainstream arts, over time. And so that's what we mean with the word marginalized. So Art Access was founded in 1984, started by a group of moms that wanted to make sure that their kids with disabilities had access to arts programming, and they were frustrated that they didn't. And so it started, we worked with kids with disabilities at the beginning, but then over time it's grown to serve not just children with disabilities, but all people with disabilities, and then also other communities that have historically been excluded from the arts and our arts community. So I'm going to kind of describe briefly what programs we have. So on this slide, there's a photo of two people sitting at a table working together, and that's a photo from our Partners Mentorship Program, which partners emerging artists with disabilities and established teaching artists in the community to do a year-long mentorship. So I'll kind of get into that program. So I'll get into that when I describe the rest of the programming. So I'm seeing that it sounds like there's a little bit of audio breaking up on my end. So I want to make sure that everyone can hear me all right.
Chandra, be sure to mute your computer.
I think it is muted.
Okay.
Yep, okay, so there it is. Is that any better, everybody?
I think so.
Okay, great.
Keep going.
Thank you. It's so important for everyone, for me, that everyone can hear me, so thank you. So anyway, so to go through some of our programs, we provide professional development for emerging artists with disabilities, and we do that through partially through that program that I just described that we have the photo of on the screen. And then also we have an open studio program where once a month we invite emerging artists with disabilities and other artists that we serve to come and use all of our materials in our workshop space. And then we provide a teaching artist who is there and available to provide one-on-one consultation and teaching. We also have Art Everywhere, which is kind of the program that we go out into the community. So we have artist residencies in Utah schools and serving mixed classrooms of children with disabilities and children without disabilities. And then we also have community art workshops, and we go into community centers, after school programs, and et cetera, that to provide inclusive arts education. And we also, this is kind of a newer program, about 5 years ago, we started doing art therapy programming to kind of fill this void that we saw in our state, not having a lot of art therapy programming, and specifically not having a lot of art therapy programming that was done by actual certified art therapists. So we have, every year we do art therapy for survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. And then we also have an annual changing theme where we serve a different community every year. So this year in 2020, we will be doing art therapy for people experiencing addiction. And then perhaps most relevant to what we're talking about today is we have a Breaking Barriers Cultural Accessibility Project where we work with our larger arts and cultural sector to make sure that we're not the only accessible arts organization in Utah, but the goal is that everybody would be an accessible arts organization in Utah. And so through that, we provide training, consultation, and education for our broader arts community. So the next slide is my journey as an artist and arts professional with a disability. And so now we're really kind of getting into the meat of what I have been very excited to talk to you about today. I have a number of photos on this screen that I will describe as I kind of get into the corresponding part of my journey. And so one of the photos in the middle is of me as a little girl, maybe like 6 or so, on a pony with kind of brownish, blondish hair, a wacky outfit that has lots of what I would like to call power flashes of patterns, and then also a pink bandana. And so I used a picture of me as a little girl to kind of talk about, talk a little bit about my origin story. If it feels a little pretentious to call it that for myself, but here we are. So I was born about 6 weeks early, and kind of went through a lot of medical stuff in the beginning of my life, but made it through just fine. And then, but I didn't really start developing speech normally. So when I was about 2.5, my parents were like, I still didn't have any words that I used. I had like one word, was Nani, and everyone in my family disagrees about whether that stood for mommy, daddy, or I said that it stood for Barney. And so, but what's interesting is that when they would talk to people about, like, it seems strange that she's not developing speech, my grandmother would say, well, all the Bonitos speak late, and so they just kind of kept kind of waiting. So anyway, I eventually figured out that I was hard of hearing. I started learning sign language, started doing speech therapy, et cetera, et cetera. And one thing that's kind of interesting in my journey is that actually in speech therapy, my dad was a trumpet player, and we had a trumpet in the house, and my speech therapist would actually use the trumpet in part of my speech therapy. So then I went on to elementary school, and I was mainstreamed. And so I was, in my district, all of the deaf and hard of hearing kids were put in the same schools to kind of share resources. So I kind of just ended up happening to go to schools that had great music programs. So and because my dad was a trumpet player, I wanted to play the trumpet. So I ended up becoming a trumpet player. And so what was interesting was that was kind of a big part of my interaction with the arts. But I wanted to tell a couple quick stories about kind of my experience with the arts. And so the first is, I remember in 9th grade, we were watching Malcolm X, a film, and we were going to be tested on it. And I loved film, I loved movies, but I always had to use captions at home. And I, at this point was pretty comfortable with saying, I need accommodations. So I asked for the captions to be turned on, and my teacher said, we're just going to do this the normal way, and refused to put on the captions. I was pretty shocked and embarrassed and hurt. So about halfway through the film, my teacher paused it and said, Chandra, it's becoming a little more difficult. It's a little more complicated now, so if you want to put on the captions, you can, and made me go up in front of the entire class and turn on the captions. It was a pretty humiliating, difficult moment. But that really just had that I've carried with me. And then the other is that as a trumpet player, I from the beginning of being in band classes, I wouldn't use interpreters. Didn't want to use interpreters because it felt weird to be a trumpet player that was deaf, and I didn't really want to say that, or it just made me feel uncomfortable. And nobody in my entire career of music would ever really tell me that it was okay. And I also got a lot of comments about being, how do you, like, it's so weird that, you're deaf and you play the trumpet. I guess it's because the trumpet's really loud, huh? And it was oversimplified and uncomfortable. So anyway, so this kind of prompted my career in the arts, and I became the executive director of Art Access. And so I've really brought my experience as a disabled person into that. And I am going a little bit over time. I am so sorry. Okay, sorry. So I kind of wanted to talk about that. When I became the executive director of Art Access, what I found was a lot of the same microaggressions that I experienced as a child and growing up. I experienced, again, as the executive director of an arts organization. So in my first couple weeks as the executive director of Art Access, I was invited to a film screening by a partner organization. It was actually a film screening on art and disability. And when I asked, I said, oh, I would love to come. Will it be captioned? They actually told me, no, it's not going to be captioned. But if you want to bring but if you want to bring your clients next year, maybe, we can work something out. And to which I said, actually it's me, I'm the executive director, and that's why I need it. So anyway, and that just like, I felt, again, humiliated, just like that experience before, which has really created this framework of why I think it's, when we're talking about preparing people with disabilities for careers in the arts, that that why it's so important to recognize that it's not just us, it's not just preparing students with disabilities, but really the arts and cultural sector needs to be prepared. So I want to go over the kind of my thoughts on what it means to do that pretty quickly, because I don't want to take time from our other wonderful presenters. So to me, what it means to prepare the arts and cultural sector is to make sure that arts organizations are accessible and that their programs are accessible. I also think it's important to create jobs, volunteer opportunities, and fellowships that value the expertise around arts, around disability and accessibility, to create more opportunities for artists, filmmakers, dancers, actors, etc. with disabilities, and then also more art, dance, and film that center around the themes of disability, so that people with disabilities see themselves from every level as not even just being able to participate, but seeing, wow, like these jobs are something that I have, that these jobs are available that have a unique perspective that I have to offer them, and then also that they're seeing themselves in the art, which I think then inspires people to consider a career in the arts. Also on the other side, so supporting potential and emerging artists with disabilities and arts professionals is really making sure that our students with disabilities have self-advocacy and community organizing skills, because inevitably, as a disabled person in the arts, you're going to have to advocate for yourself and also for your community. So the other is making sure that students with disabilities have access to arts education and workshops, art history classes, arts-based internships and volunteer positions, and also talking to arts teachers in K-12, not just visual arts teachers, but also band teachers, drama teachers, about accessibility. And then also making sure that there are dedicated conferences, fellowships, scholarships, and spaces within those things, specifically for arts professionals with disabilities. So I know that I went a little bit over time, so thank you for bearing with me. And I have included, now this slide has my email address and my cell phone number on the screen, and I absolutely would love to connect with you if you have any questions or comments or want to connect. So thank you.
Chandra, this is Tallery. Thank you so much for your point of view, particularly your stories about your own personal lived experience as an artist with a disability, and also as a professional advocate for inclusive arts is so valuable. I'm going to pose one question to you, Chandra, and we might move on to the next presenter, but perhaps we'll have time at the end of the presentations to circle back around with Beth. And my question for you, Chandra, is that you talked so much in your presentation about the idea of if you build the inclusive programming that the people with disabilities will come, and you talked about your own personal experience with band, where you never had the opportunity as a young artist to have a direct conversation with an adult about your experience as an artist with a disability. So my question for you is a practical one, which is, what are the words that teachers and mentors can use to address a student directly that has a difference or a disability? How can that conversation feel comfortable and appropriate and not at all intrusive? And I'm thinking specifically about educators that maybe don't have lived experience with disability. So Chandra, I'll pose that question to you, and then we'll go ahead and move on to Amanda, who is going to talk a little bit more about the tools and the resources that we can provide students to have careers in the arts in our K through 12 settings. But Chandra, I want you to think a little bit about what is that key question? How do we get that conversation started? Because as a society, we don't always talk about disability and difference directly, and I agree with you that that could be really useful. So Amanda, I'm going to pass it off to you and have you talk a little bit more about what access inclusion looks like in the K through 12 setting.
Thank you, Tallery. Hi, I am Amanda McPhee, and I work as the arts coordinator of arts-based education in District 75 in the New York City Department of Education. We are a district that actually services students with moderate to severe disabilities in all 5 boroughs in New York. And one of the things that we focus on is that in our district, like I said, that we serve students that have more severe disabilities and that are in our programs for that. So when we look at, just like we framed a lot of the other presenters or will be framing, one of the things that hopefully this will be something that both teachers in classrooms in any arts discipline or even people that are teaching artists, when you think about building the whole child, we need to think about the post-secondary domains that lead to being able to be an independent member of society. So when we think about that, we think about those domains which are education, employment, and independent living. So in District 75, we truly believe that all arts-based instruction promotes student achievement in communication, socialization, academic learning, and especially with arts proficiency, but it actually increases all of those things so that students can reach their IEP goals. So what skills do we need to integrate into our arts class, but also thinking about, you know, are those skills are not necessarily just arts-related skills, but how art is the medium to practice and acquire transferable skills. So when you look at the skills that you're building in any arts discipline, think about how those skills work with transitional skills that can generalize into life skills. So one of the things from an instructional standpoint is we want to look at 3 main things that you can really integrate into your classrooms to help build independence, communication, and safety into your instruction. And that will inherently lead to those transitional skills. They'll lead to independent living skills that we're looking for in post-secondary options for our students. So one of the things that we like to think about is that independent skills are fundamentally important for all students, but very much in particular for students with needs. So looking at our classroom and thinking about how we can structure and create work systems so that students can independently complete a task. And what do those classroom supports look like? How does labeling in our classroom look like so that we can actually have students reference areas of the classroom, reference procedures that they're working with so that it's not us prompting the students to complete a task, but that we have developed an environment that the students can function independently. A lot of that also comes into providing options for student choice and providing students the ability to truly problem solve. When we think about, you know, even the neurodiverse populations that we support, learning comes from having to figure things out. So if you give students the opportunities to problem solve in your classroom, you're going to help them truly build authentic independent skills by having them in whatever capacity that they're at, be able to start and build those skills. So in the next couple slides, when we talked about creating structures and systems in the classroom so that you're able, or so that students are able to do the work independently, we look at something called an independent or an embedded schedule. So when you look at this, this is something from a music teacher at a school in Brooklyn. And this is something that the students follow a visual schedule for the day so that they have an opportunity to see what's coming next. They can follow along at their own pace, and then there is an ability to finish the task that indicates completion. On the next slide, we have something called a work system. And in this work system, this is something from a visual arts class where they were working on sculptures, where they were building furniture out of cardboard, where it's very clear and explicit directions where it shows visual prompts on what the gluing actually looks like. It shows a visual prompt of how to apply glue to the piece of paper and then actually apply it and give it to a partner. The next picture on this shows there is a guided work system where the student is actually laying out the amount of toothpick nails that they need to use to actually complete the task. So really structuring that activity. And as an educator, when you're working on these systems, when you take a moment to task analyze things, the deeper we task analyze an activity for a student to do and we map that out, the more independent the student is going to be able to complete that task. On the next slide, we have an example of a structured art project. So sometimes when we're working with certain students that have fine and gross motor dexterity delays, that we can actually look at how can we develop how can we mask off certain parts of the canvas that we're working with so that students can complete a task independently. So it's really just thinking about what are systems and structures that you can put into place so that students can complete the task. And then for their independence portion, one of the big things that we support in District 75 is actually a lot of our students receive occupational therapy and physical therapy and also speech services. So working with, in terms of physical, the challenges to create a more physically accepting environment in the classroom, working with OTs and PTs can really be a huge support, because one thing that you can learn from working with a lot of the OTs and PTs that are at the schools is that they can adapt brushes, they can adapt paint rollers, they can adapt multiple things in the dance studios so that you can have an opportunity to give access to more students. And so the more you work with clinicians, expert teachers if you're a teaching artist, or related service providers, the more access that you're giving the students in the classroom to be more independent. So moving on, we also think as communication as being something that is absolutely fundamentally important for all children. And we think about that is that communication is a huge essential skill for accessing the world. And so every student, every person in the world should be given and deserves every opportunity to communicate. So one thing we need to think about as educators is not only working with speech and language pathologists that may be working in the classrooms with you, but to think about what do we need to, how do we measure a child's receptive communication? So how do we measure what a child is taking in? And thinking about that was, what do we need to provide in that environment for people to have the ability to expressively communicate? So looking at not only that, but how to teach appropriate work communication skills and teach career-specific vocabulary. You know, one of the things that you can do as an educator is, of course, plan questions so that you can make sure that you have taught the necessary language for them to respond, but also have prepared alternative communication, augmentative communication, symbolic representation of text so that students are able to respond and able to participate in those conversations. So when students are able to participate in conversations, they're practicing using programmatic devices or augmentative communication or picture-to-picture exchanges. They're able to generalize that to be part of a larger community outside of the classroom. And we think about communication as opening huge doors for our students. So when we think about that, we're thinking about, why is this important? How can I give my students the opportunity to communicate in every possible way? And a lot of that comes down to, if you're a student, sometimes we in New York refer to them as a visual art or, arts discipline specific cluster teacher, where they work with multiple students throughout the day. And sometimes, reaching out to a speech therapist that works with the students in the class or reaching out to their homeroom teacher really helps understand more of the programmatic equipment that students are using. And once we know how to use that programmatic equipment or how to structure questioning so that we know that they're able to answer, it's one of those things that we're opening doors for students to request their basic wants and needs. We're opening opportunity for them to have spontaneous conversations. And we can give those opportunities by incorporating something called joint action routines. And when we think about this from the lens of giving opportunities to students to engage in peer-to-peer social interactions, so things that joint action routines do is they're actually structured activities where students are given steps in a process and they practice wait time and turn taking with having social narratives, play, and critique in different activities in their classroom. Okay, so the last part is when, there's two more sections to this. So when we think about another way is that in our district, especially with students with moderate to severe disabilities, we think about how can we integrate independence and safety into that environment. So we know that that increases self-esteem and awareness of the body in different environments. So doing that, like we said before, is an ability to open up and give opportunity to problem solve so that they recognize obstacles and avoid danger when navigating in an environment. So giving opportunity for students to travel from small group to large group instruction or station activities are a way to actually integrate those safety options in the class by making sure that students are aware of their environment, they're visualizing the environment, and you're practicing those skills that can then transfer into being able to navigate their community. So one other thing that you can do, which is the last part of this, is that one of the things that you can do in a classroom that we've started doing in District 75 is work-based learning opportunities in the classroom. And art-based learning or work-based learning programs are basically opportunities that are career-related skills in a classroom environment where you basically set up a job space opportunity that relates to a real-world setting in your classroom. So one of the things that we did was actually developed a decorative design microenterprise so that students were able to, in their visual arts classes, create high-end textiles where they were going through and actually, I'm going to skip ahead to the next slide, where the skills that they're developing are customer service training, they're communicating in a professional environment, they're working in a team, they're working with another area with another homeroom teacher outside of the visual arts teacher, creating a materials budget and a marketing campaign. They're going through and in the career of textile creation, they're doing sealing of canvas and wallpaper, large format painting for canvases and wallpaper. They're using painting tools appropriately, and they're, showing safety and independence in the work area. And a lot of times that when you develop these work-based learning opportunities in your classes, the students are then able to work in a group setting where if they're in middle school or even high school, that this can then be practiced. All the communication skills that they've learned, all the ability to interact with their peers, the independent skills that they've learned can actually be then generalized to a job-based opportunity when they graduate from school or when they do an internship in high school. And thinking about just some questions left for you, like what can you do at your school or what can you do as a teaching artist when you're working with schools, is think about what jobs could take place in your classroom or community and how can you make that into something that the students can do. What are the arts-related skills that can go into, that they can practice, that can then be transferred? And what are, something's happening to the slide, sorry. And thinking about how these can be generalized into the other areas of the school building, how can these be generalized into their home community, and how can they practice them in different environments? And just always remembering that that art skill can then translate into that transition skill that students can then go into their life skills.
Amanda, thank you so much. This is Valerie. Your presentation was so chock full of so many practical ideas, thinking about strategies for communication and independence, creating an accessible environment, offering problem-solving skills. So I'm going to do the same thing for you as I did for Chandra, which is pose an assignment to you, a question for you to answer, and then it'll be up to Beth at the end of the webinar to see if we have time to either answer that question now or if we're kind of waiting until later to answer it. My question for you, Amanda, is this. in all of the different tools that you offered, I'm wondering if you can offer the participants of this webinar one or two skills that they could implement relatively quickly and easily as they're starting to transition their space, their K through 12 space, to be more accessible. So what, in other words, is there a couple of specific strategies that they could implement, later this week or tomorrow or first thing Monday morning that would really get the ball rolling in terms of all of the other opportunities that you listed? So that's the question that I'm going to pose to you, Amanda, and I'll, like I said, I'll pass it off to Beth to see whether or not we've got time to address that during the webinar or whether or not that's something we follow up with later. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to our next presenter, Zazel. And Zazel is going to talk a little bit more about the tools and the resources that we might need to offer careers to professional artists with disabilities in professional settings. So Zazel, I'll pass it off to you.
Okay, hello. I am Zazel Shiva O'Gara, the Artistic Director and founder of VCO Dance Project. Excuse me. Okay. Excuse me. It jumped. Okay, VCO Dance Project, I started. It is a physically integrated dance company. I started it after I became disabled. I had a brain tumor, and I have made it my mission to encourage the integration and inclusion of people with disabilities in society through the creation and performance of original dance works with artistic distinction. We talk about the social model of disability within the dance company. Now, people are most significantly disabled by barriers in society rather than by their impairment, disability, or difference. Building an integrated dance company removes the attitudinal barriers, reduces prejudices, ableism, and stereotyping. It increases self-esteem, equips company members with valuable life skills which extend far beyond the studio walls. Okay, now VCO Dance Project is located in New York City. It was founded in 2014, and as I said before, VCO Dance Project, it encourages the integration and inclusion of people with disabilities and in dance and in society. VCO Dance Project endeavors to present new, exciting, challenging, and inspiring contemporary dance performances to the widest possible audience. Now, we also hold master classes and workshops and are given throughout the year. We try to do this yearly so that we can encourage new dancers to participate in our performances yearly. The company composition. What makes VCO Dance Project unique? While physical, sensory, intellectual, or psychological limitations may prevent an individual from dancing, VCO Dance Project specifically invites individuals with various disabilities who don't have any previous formal training to experience the joy of movement. The company consists of dancers who have cerebral palsy, spinal bifida, osteogenesis imperfecta, ataxia, traumatic brain injury, spinal cord injury, polio, and they are masters of dance. Part of some of our work is the contemporary modern dance of Horton and Improvisation. The company's signature piece entitled Limitless, choreographed by me, is a contemporary modern dance work which introduces dancers and their audiences to an integrated Horton Dance technique and improvisation. I learned Horton Dance as a student, scholarship student at Alvin Ailey and at University of Michigan. I recognize that Horton can translate to persons with disabilities since Horton creates discipline, body awareness, and above all, upper body strength. Horton is known to construct some of the best human skyscrapers in the dance world. It builds really great upper body strength and really beautiful sense of dance within the dancers. Limitless. When the dancers perform on stage, the dancers roll out on the stage with switches upper body strength and flexible lower body. The dancers begin the lateral T sequence from side to side. They go into a flat back sequence. Then they start to roll down, turning around rapidly in the wheelchairs. Dancers begin to interact. After the rigorous Horton movement sequences, the dancers improvise, releasing their bodies and exploring the body's shape, different levels, and dynamics. They then begin to improvise fully. Improvisation is very, very fun. Now, what are the benefits of improvisation for an integrated dance company? Improvisation can boost one's confidence. Practicing improvisational skills gives dancers the freedom to make mistakes and try new things. Improvisation can make choreography seem less dangerous. It can also help the dancers find out who they are and what style of dance they are really interested in. Improvisation can enhance the performance quality, and it makes them bring each other to life. We oftentimes collaborate with well-renowned artists. Some of the people that we have worked with are Joya Powell, a Bessie Award winner, Kim Greer-Martinez from the Rod Rogers Dance Company, Maguette Camarera from the Alvin Ailey Dance Theater, and Shel Benjamin from the dance director of the Master School. Okay. I am also the John F. Kennedy VSA Teaching Artist Fellow. I was selected to work with adolescents in education from the ages 13 through 21. This summer, through Include NYC, I put together a dance workshop for children who have autism. Some of the things I specified for them to do were repetition of movement for children to absorb dance techniques, exercises and drills, experience of all kinds of fun ways to move. I encouraged the creativity and provided an opportunity for them to learn various dance styles, and I had them explore what makes a great performance. What was the students' objectives? To increase muscle tone and strength, to perform one activity at a time, to learn structured, visual, stimulating, and fun movement phrases, to learn to play various musical instruments, and master activities will be linked together to create choreography for final performance for their parents and caregivers. What happens when a student with disability prepares for audition and performances in integrated settings? It improves attention and behavior. It regulates emotions, and it increases interactions. One of the things that I learned while working with the students with autism was that it was important to, particularly with the adolescents, was to bring the parents into the room, to have assistance, to make sure that they utilize the instruments. And it was great to offer them a reward after they fulfilled the choreography. If you want more information, please contact me at VCO Dance Project. Thank you.
Zazel, this is Tallery. Thank you so much. I thought it was particularly valuable for you to talk not only about some of the specifics of improvisation, but also about some of the more general benefits, the social and cultural benefits of participating in these kind of professional settings. So thank you for that. Just like I did with Amanda and just like I did with Chandra, I have an assignment for you, Zazel.
Yeah.
And that is to think about some practical examples. I'm thinking about your experience specifically when you're in rehearsal with both standing dancers and sitting dancers, or maybe dancers with other disabilities that don't affect their physical bodies. But I would love for you to share maybe 1 or 2 or even 3 quotable quotes that you find yourself saying out loud in rehearsal that might help a teacher that would like to try inclusive dance know what words they could use to begin that kind of work in an inclusive setting. So I'll give that as your assignment, and we'll share that with our participants after the webinar is completed, or if we have time at the end. But right now, I would like to pass the baton on to our final presenter, Jonathan, and I will let Jonathan introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jonathan Herman. I'm the CEO of the National Guild for Community Arts Education, and this slide has a picture of me, very recent, more of a selfie from my phone. It has a picture of me wearing a blue sport coat and a blue shirt, and I have gray hair, and I'm standing in front of pine trees. I am going to talk I guess about the broader context and some of the opportunities and that I see in the field, and some of the work that the way we could leverage some of the resources out there. And I'll give a couple of examples like similar to some of the programs that have been mentioned already, and that may illustrate some of the points I'm making. I am the Executive Director, or the CEO of the National Guild for Community Arts Education. This slide has a picture of our logo, which has 4 horizontal sort of horizons of different colors. The Guild was founded in 1937, and we are the sole service organization for community arts education providers in the United States. We work with a very broad constituency of organizations. Our vision is a nation where arts education is accessible and embraced as essential for human development and healthy communities. Our mission we articulate as ensuring all people have opportunities to maximize their creative potential, and we do that by developing leaders, strengthening organizations, and advocating for community arts education. The next slide has an infographic about the sort of reach of, this is our members. We work with member organizations who are in all disciplines. They're community-based organizations of all types, offering programs in all disciplines. Of course, that's not the full reach or ecology of the arts education providers in the country, but we reach through these programs 2.5 million students of all ages. The reach extends through performances to something like 8 million. These are all, of course, estimates. And the organizations that we work with directly employ teaching artists of more than 20,000. And so it's really just, my point is to give a sense that there's a huge number of organizations who are committed to the values of the National Guild of creating broad access to arts learning for people of all ages. Our core values are, on this next slide, are four, and they inform all of our activity and programs. They are leadership, equity, creativity, and community. And I just want to read the way we talk about equity because I think it's very applicable here. We promote accessibility, inclusion, racial justice, and social change because the arts are fundamental to our humanity and a catalyst for equity. The next slide is a map. It's sort of shaded. This gives a sense of the density of membership or the organizations that we work with directly. And I think it probably mirrors in some ways where concentrations of arts organizations may be. There's on the coast in New York and California and Massachusetts. We have many in Texas and actually Oklahoma. We're working with a lot of organizations, but they're spread all across the country. There's some 400 plus organizations in 45 states. And the organizations I'm thinking about, we work with, there are a range of nonprofit, community-based organizations that offer open programs, but they look different. Some are community schools of the arts. They're very much shaped like sort of have a sequential program and instructional programs and workshops. Some are larger arts and cultural centers, the education programs of those. There are a lot of youth theaters and orchestras and others that are doing educational work, as we know. And then many of them are divisions or parts of larger organizations like art universities, performing arts companies, museums, and government agencies such as local arts agencies. This next slide is really just another sense, just give a sense of the diversity of disciplines. There's a bar chart on the left that shows the frequency of disciplines offered in these our member institutions. Music is the most represented, and there are, then after that, there are quite a bit of dance, visual art, and literary organizations and media arts organizations, and they are of all budget sizes. The Guild does its work collaboratively with these organizations, and as I mentioned earlier, through our mission, we're seeking to build the capacity of them by all kinds of programs and professional development, and we're also working with them to increase the support and investment, in other words, advocating for that work in their communities. And so a lot of our work we do directly, but a lot of it is in partnership, and I think that's kind of my key theme is the rest of my remarks. I'm going to skip this slide, but this next slide just lists some of the other specific areas we work in, including creative aging, leadership development, partnerships with K-12 schools. And these are some examples that I wanted to give. And I guess my main point here is that there's a lot of great work going on, but not nearly enough in terms of creating access and inclusion for people with disabilities. And through partnerships and working with organizations that have that expertise, as well as organizations who have the interest and willingness and values to reach them but don't have the expertise, I think we can accomplish a lot more. I'm going to run through, if I have time, several examples. The first one is a music organization in New York called the Philemon M. D'Agostino Greenberg Music School. And the slide has a picture of a man with a baseball hat playing the saxophone. And that organization is a long-time organization founded in the early 20th century with a specific mission of providing opportunities for people of all ages with vision loss to pursue their interests, study music, and it does that through working directly and also through public schools. It works with professional musicians as well as college-bound students. And among its services are a fairly sophisticated Braille and large print music transcription service that they provide to organizations across the country. They were kind of at the vanguard of that. I know there are a lot of other opportunities and services for that, but they were one of the first. The next example I wanted to mention was this one is, I think, an example of a partnership. It's called the Music Institute of Chicago, and it is a very large community music school serving thousands of students in multiple locations throughout Chicago. It's also a longtime institution founded in 1931. But one of its programs, the way it increases access is something called the Accessible Arts Program. And it's working with partnering with an organization called the Institute for Therapy Through the Arts, but which was at one time part of the organization, and now it's spun off into a separate organization. It does a lot of things, and some of it, as the name suggests, is in the arts therapy world. But the way that it works with the Music Institute of Chicago is it collaborates in both levels, working with families and students, as well as working with professionals, in other words, teaching artists and educators in Chicago. But I think the partnership with the families and students is really impressive and a great model. Any student working, studying at the Music Institute is eligible for 4 free hours of consultative services with their creative arts therapists at the ITA, which is the Institute of Therapy for the Arts. And in addition, those professional arts therapists are available for consultation, observations of lessons, and they can also work with families on a consultative basis. And as I mentioned, the other work they do with professionals is a lot of professional development for teaching artists who are in all settings in Chicago. The next example is called the Access Gallery and Studio Space. It's in Denver. This was formerly, I think it was founded as a VSA in Colorado in 1978. And it's very interesting and exciting the way they've evolved, as they are specifically talk about their mission as increasing economic opportunities for young people with disabilities through the arts. And they focus in a very intentional way on people 18 to 26. And they're not talking about traditional jobs in the arts necessarily, but they're talking about ways of earning a living, with knowing that 70% of all persons with disabilities are unemployed, and youth with disabilities over 21 are at the highest risk of losing support and finishing school. The programs, the ways that they very creatively offer ways to learn job skills and make money. They have a commissioning program for in their gallery where young people's pieces are sold. They also offer pet portraits of other young artists, and those young artists were compensated for that. And they also do large-scale corporate commissions. I am going to jump to the next example, which is the Miracle Project at the Wallace Annenberg Center for the Performing Arts. And it's another great example of a partnership where the Miracle Project, which is a performing arts inclusive theater and film program for people of all ages, is operating sort of without a facility in Los Angeles, but they partnered with the Wallace to provide in their great facility to provide workshops, as well as the opportunity to perform in integrated theater productions. And the one that they do once a year, this is an example of it. It's called Identity the Musical, and it was it's a presentation on the main stage at the Wallace of people with disabilities and without. And my last example is Body Shift, which is a dance program, an inclusive dance program with mixed ability, improvisational dance, maybe not that different, or in a similar way to ZKO, as part of ArtSpark Texas, which was also a VSA. I love this picture, which shows people using wheelchairs and people standing and people lying on the ground outdoors at a plaza, obviously sort of part of a performing company. They have an adult dance company that performs all around Austin, Texas. And my last example is the Berkeley Institute for Arts, Education, and Special Needs. And I just wanted to mention this because it's a great resource to the field, and I won't go into all of their programs, but I just wanted to invite people to visit their website. They're part of the Berkeley School of Music and the other allied organizations. And one of the great things they have is called the ABLE Music Resource Center. And ABLE stands for Arts Better the Lives of Everyone. And it's full of articles and resources and videos and teaching resources. And that ends my presentation. Thank you very much. I really appreciate being a part of this and the great work that NEA and Beth and all the presenters do.
Jonathan, this is Tallery. Thank you so much. What a wonderful resource your guild is for those of us that are doing accessible and inclusive work to know that there's one place we can go to and find so many exciting examples of accessible and inclusive arts. My assignment for you, Jonathan, is as follows. I want you to think about one or maybe more common denominators in the organizations that you lifted up as examples today in your presentation. What are some of the common denominators or best practices in those arts organizations that you think would be helpful to think about in what makes them so accessible? In other words, if there was an arts organization that wanted to be more accessible, what could they learn from? What are the practical things they could learn from some of these exemplars that you have lifted up? So that is the assignment that I will give you, Jonathan, and we will finish up with that probably for the most part offline, since I know we're coming close to the end of our time. But I'm going to pass it back now to Beth so that she can do some final thoughts and wrap up for our time together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tallery, and thank you to all of our speakers. You were all wonderful. You provided a great diversity of perspectives and experiences, populations that you work with, and approaches. And it was just a wonderful collection of your stories, your work, and Tallery, thank you for doing a great job of leading this conversation. And your questions were wonderful. And what we'll do is document them and get the answers, and we're going to send them out to everybody after we're done and after we archive the webinar. The webinar will be archived. I'd also like to thank our wonderful captioner, Edie. She did a great job for us. But we do have 2 minutes to answer one of those questions that Tallery asked of Chandra. So Tallery, could you repeat the question? And Chandra, could you give us a quick answer? I thought it was a great question.
Sure. So the question that I asked Chandra was about her own experience as a young artist with a disability. And it had to do with what words can teachers and mentors use to have a direct conversation with a student with a disability about some of the access needs and accommodations that they might need to be successful in an arts career path?
Yeah, I love that question so much. And really, I think it's two things. I think the first is kind of like you said it, having a direct conversation. I think a lot of people think that the greatest compliment you can give a disabled person is to tell them that they don't seem disabled. And that was my experience growing up, is over and over people told me that, which made me feel like, you know, oh, then that's a good thing, and so then I can't really talk about this with anyone. And beyond just being direct about it, I think talking about disability is an asset and as a strength. And so framing that conversation around like, wow, you know, I bet your disability seems to really like make you have this skill, or so kind of opening it as a positive thing, so that then there's more opportunity just that's going to make the student more comfortable and you more comfortable to talk about it. And then the second is there are so many brilliant examples of artists with disabilities in every field. I mean, you know, one thing that, you know, I thought was funny is that growing up, nobody ever talked to me about like, you know, Stevie Wonder being blind and how being blind, you know, impacted like how that might have shaped his music, or Beethoven being deaf. Like, and these great examples that I think can help artists with disabilities like feel more like, wow, there are these incredible people out there, and yes, their disability was not just something that they quote unquote overcame, but was something that probably actually made them as brilliant as they are.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chandra. That was a great way to wrap up the conversation. We appreciate you tackling that question and providing such a great answer. And I want to thank all of our speakers for their thoughtful comments and participation in this. And we look forward to continuing this work and continuing our webinar series. So I'd like to encourage you to all join us for the next webinar, which will we're looking at having it in December, and we will send out that information to everyone that participated. We will send out the archive link for this webinar and we'll wrap up those questions for you, the Q&A, and send that out. So once again, thank you to our speakers and to Tallery and to all of you for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time. Have a great day.